All right, let's start. I'm going to put the link to the sources in the chat. It's the same thing I emailed last night, though. If at some point in the future someone is listening to a recording of this and they would like the packet, they just need to email me at deborahklapper@gmail.com. All right, this is a third in the series called Dine Mamonot, or the Dine Mamonot B'Shlosha, or the first chapter of Sanhedrin. And we are today on page 2b in Sanhedrin. We are going to continue from where we left off last time. Here, let me share this screen. There we go. Last time we were, last time we ended by deciding that the Mishnah is making a distinction between two different kinds of cases involving money. And we had Rav Huna told us that we should read the Mishnah as if it said cases involving money. And what kinds of cases involving money are those? Well, those are cases involving theft or involving damage. But in the case of a loan or an admission, that would be different. And the very end of last week's share, we mentioned that what the difference would be might have something to do with needing, being allowed to have rather non-expert judges on the court rather than expert judges. So we're going to go into that in more detail tonight. And as part of that, we're going to examine 3 psukim in Shemot. So we're in chapter 22 in Shemot. And verse 6. And let's talk about that first, and then we'll get into the Gemara. So the Torah talks about a number of different situations. The Torah talks a number of times about the possibility that someone might be watching something for somebody else, and that something might get damaged, lost, stolen, destroyed. If it's an animal, it might die or run away. And the Torah prescribes different consequences in different passages, and the standard rabbinic interpretation of this is that each of the cases is a little bit different. The piece we're looking at this evening is the piece that we interpret as being about a shomer chinam, or a free guard. We talked about this a little bit last fall, but a free guard is somebody who's taking care of somebody else's stuff as a favor. They're not getting anything in return. They're not allowed to use the object, and then they'd be a borrower. They're just giving away their services as a caretaker and getting nothing in return. Okay, and in that case, the rule, if the thing gets stolen, is that they have to swear that they didn't use it, and it's not their fault it got stolen, and then they're done. They don't have to pay for it. They have no further responsibility. And at that point, if the owner wants to, they can look for the thief, but they can't go after the caretaker. Okay, so let's look at the psukim, and we'll see that there's a pasuk here that's not entirely clear. It's part of the passage, and that's going to be the problem that the Gemara is going to be dealing with. Okay, so we are here in Shemot 22:6. Ki yitain ish el re'ehu kesef o kelim lishmor. If a man gives to his friend money or tools to watch, v'gunav mi beit ha'ish, and they're stolen from the house of the man. It seems like the word man here is talking about different people. The man at the beginning of the verse is the owner of the object, and the man in the middle of the verse is the person taking care of the object. If the thief is found, he pays double, which is the double payment which we referenced in the Mishnah, and we'll be mentioning again later this evening, that you pay if you steal and then you get caught. Okay. If the thief is not caught, then v'nikrav bal habayit el ha'elohim, then the owner of the house is brought close to the judges. Im lo shalach yado b'mlechet re'ehu, to swear that he did not send his hand against his friend's work or stuff. Okay, so far that just seems to all be about the shomer chinam. But then it goes on. Al kol davar pesha, about any matter of negligence, al shor, al chamor, al se, al salma, al kol aveda. So about anything of negligence, any ox, any donkey, any sheep or clothing, or anything that's lost, asher yomar ki huzeh, that it could be said, this is it. Ad ha'elohim yavod dvar shnehem. The case of the two of them will come to the judges. Asher yarshiyun Elohim yishalem shnayim l're'ehu. And the one who is found guilty by the judges will pay double to his friend. It sounds like that verse has taken a different direction and is now talking in general about a case in which there's a fight about who stole what from whom or whose object something is, and we're just in a sort of a generic court case in which we're fighting over a thing here in verse 8. Okay, now to the Gemara. Okay, so here we are. My kasav. So what does the Mishnah think? What does it think about what, you might ask, but it's going to answer that more or less. I kasavar eruv parshiot katuvkan. If the Mishnah thinks that the verses I just read here in Shemot 22, those are an eruv parshiot, they're a mixture of passages, meaning it's not all on one topic, then lib'i nami mumchim. Then the Mishnah ought to require expert judges even for a loan. Now, the thing is, if you hold the idea of eruv parshiot, that position elsewhere in the Gemara is associated with the belief that the words in pasuk chet, asher yomar ki huzeh, that he will say, this is it. Those words are used elsewhere in the Gemara as the source for the idea that if a lender sues a borrower for repayment and the borrower says, I do owe you money, everything you said is true, but you have the amount wrong and I owe you less than you say, then that's what the text is talking about when it says, this is it means this is the only thing I owe you. And that's the case in which the text is saying that that person has to go in front of the judges and is implied swear that he's telling the truth. Okay, and that is that halacha, that if you concede to owing money, you just disagree about the amount, you have to swear that you don't owe more than you say you owe. That is absolutely halacha. The only question is whether it comes from this pasuk or not. And if it comes from this pasuk, then that derivation is associated with the idea that eruv parshiot katuv kan, that this text in Shemot 22 is a mixture of different topics. That's certainly not the topic that it was talking about in the previous verse, or in the rest of verse 8 for that matter. Okay, so if that piece of verse 8 is talking about loan collection and a fight about how much people owe in the process of a loan collection, then we can derive that you need a court of judges in order to collect loans, because it says the two of them should go before the judges. Okay. And judges is plural, and we don't want an even number, so that has to be 3. That gets us 3 judges. But judges, our usual presumption is that the word Elohim, when it's talking about people in the Torah, means expert judges. right? These are not, just anybody. These are people who have some sort of qualification to be, they know what they're doing. Okay, so if you believe that this pasuk chet here, is talking about collecting loans and swearing that you don't owe more than you say you owe, then in order to do that, you should need to do it in front of a panel of 3 expert judges. Okay. On the other hand, v'i kasavar ein eruv parshiot katuv kan. If the Mishnah holds that this text is not mixed up, it's all on one topic and there's nothing here about loans, then shlosha lamali. Then where did the Mishnah get the idea that you need 3 judges to make somebody pay a loan at all? Okay, now the position that at the end of last week's shir that we had claimed was the position of the Mishnah is that you need a panel of 3 judges to collect a loan, but they don't have to be experts. And the Gemara's problem here is that that position doesn't seem to be a possibility in interpreting Shemot 22. Either you think that Shemot 22:8 is talking about collecting loans, in which case you need Elohim, you need 3 qualified judges, or Shemot 22:8 is not talking about collecting loans, in which case the Torah never talks about needing judges to collect loans at all, and why would you even need 3? Okay. Well, there are going to be 2 ways out of this. So let's start with the first one. Le'olam kasavar eruv parshiot katuv kan. Nope, really, the Mishnah does think that the passage here in Shemot 22 is a mixture of different topics. And uvedinhu delibi nami mumkin. And you're right. In fact, we ought to require a panel of expert judges to collect a loan. But now we have to explain why we don't, even though the Torah seems to say that we should. And the reason we don't require expert judges, that's because of what Rabbi Chanina said. Because Rabbi Chanina said, Devar Torah, echad dinei mamonot, v'echad dinei nefashot b'drisha v'chakira. Rabbi Chanina says, the Torah says that cases about money and capital cases about killing people, as far as the Torah is concerned, they have exactly the same court procedure as regards interrogating and cross-examining witnesses. I use the term cross-examination here, even though it's not exactly what it is. These are drisha, are questions that addressed to the witnesses, asking them for the details of exactly what they saw, who lent who money or who killed who, whatever, depending on what kind of case you have, and where, and exactly at what time, and could you really see it clearly, and that kind of thing. Stuff that if it's pertinent to the case. If they don't know the answers to those questions, you can't convict because you actually need the answers to those questions. And chakira are questions that are asked just to trip the witnesses up. If the witnesses just say, I don't know, that's good enough. But if they contradict each other, then we suspect that they're engaged in a not very successful, not very skilled conspiracy. All right, so those would be questions like, what color were the figs on the tree growing over where the person was murdered? And I think that's one of the examples later on in the Gemara. So we don't actually care what color the figs are. It doesn't matter. But if one of the 2 witnesses says, oh yeah, there were a lot of these dark black figs on the tree, and the other one says, actually, it was an apple tree, then now all of a sudden we aren't entirely sure they were in the same place watching the same scene. Okay. But I translated it interrogation and cross-examination, and we're just going to deal with that. Maybe I'll come up with something better next time. In any case, Rabbi Chanina says, as far as the Torah was concerned, court procedure is the same for everything. It doesn't matter. If you're trying to collect $5 that you lent someone to buy lunch, that's the same thing as if we're going to put somebody to death for massacring a dozen people. The procedure would be the same. Okay. Shenemar mishpat echad yelachem. Because it says in Vayikra 24:22, you will have one legal system. Now, it seems in Vayikra 24:22 that the primary focus of that pasuk is that you can't have different kinds of criminals having different standards applied to them. It seems to be about whether local born people or immigrants will have different standards applied to them. But Rabbi Hanina seems to be expanding it to, we're only going to have one standard and we're going to use it all the time. So why did we decide that cases about, I should say cases about money. I'm sorry, not cases about law. That's what happens when you type in a hurry. I'm sorry. So what happens, why did we decide that cases about money don't require the same kind of interrogation and cross-examination? Well, so that we don't lock the door in front of the borrowers. So as we discussed last week, there's a concern that if you make it too difficult to collect loans, people won't be willing to lend money to begin with. And in the long run, that's not in the best interest of the borrowers who need to have access to money. And if the only way they can have access to money is if we make it easier for them to lose the court case at the end of the situation, that might just be the price we all have to pay. Remembering, incidentally, that in the absence of interest, lending people money, and in the presence of Shemitah, lending people money is exclusively an act of charity, and there's a decent chance that you'll lose the money and no chance that you'll end up with more money. So we need to make the lender's life as easy as possible. There's no reason to believe they'd participate in that system. Okay. So that means effectively, as of right now, we've decided that the Torah really said that collecting a loan should have the same kind of court procedure as a criminal case, with expert judges and with full interrogation of the witnesses and with everything. But we decided not to do it that way because then it would be too expensive, it would take too long, it would be too difficult to collect loans. And if you apply the same standard of evidence to loan collection as to criminal trials, then it's also, a lot of people aren't going to get paid back because the standards of evidence in criminal trials are designed to make sure that you don't ever convict the wrong person. Whereas you need a different standard for collecting loans because it's not nearly as clear that nobody suffers if you just don't catch anyone. Okay, that's where we are so far. But in that case, the Gemara says, "Elame'ata ta'u lo yishalmu." In that case, the Gemara says, if these layperson judges who were allowing to decide the case, even though they're not supposed to, right? They don't really, the Torah didn't really want them to, but we're giving them permission to, right? Society has, as a group, decided to let these people pretend to be judges. So in that case, ta'u lo yishalimu, if they made a mistake, they should not have to pay. So you should know that, as I put in the English, an expert judge, a trained judge, does not have to pay for errors that he makes, right? If he awards the property to the wrong person or makes somebody pay a loan that they don't owe, or doesn't collect a loan from somebody who does owe it, those kinds of things where the wrong person ends up with the money. So he doesn't have, sometimes if it's discovered that he made a mistake, we might reverse the judgment. But even in a case where we decide he was wrong, he doesn't have to pay out of his own pocket to make it better unless the mistake was actually like an egregious, negligent mistake where there was a Mishnah he should have known and he didn't remember it, like something on that level. If it's just like a judgment call that everyone else would have made differently, or it's an obscure source that he didn't know or something like that, then it's not, we don't make him pay out of pocket. So the suggestion here is that if the layperson judges are doing their best and they're doing what we told them to do, and the legal system has endorsed their judging here, then they should get the same treatment as expert judges, and they also shouldn't pay if they make a mistake. Problem is, kol shekinatan noel delet bifnei lavin. But now that will definitely lock the door in front of the borrowers, because when the lender is considering lending the money, he's going to think to himself, well, okay, a year from now, when I come to get this money back, I'm going to have some schlemiel who doesn't know what he's doing, who's going to look at the case and say, that guy doesn't owe you money, and he's not going to pay me. And then even if I prove that he was wrong, I'm still never going to see my money. Certainly not from the judge, and by then the defendant may have disappeared. So at that point you say, you know what, actually I'm not lending money, and you lock the door. Right? So we don't, that's not a tolerable consequence. So we are in fact going to make these lay people, judges, pay for their errors, even though they are actually just following instructions. Okay, so here we have a little bit of a tangent, but it's an important one. And the Gemara says, Ihachi, in that case, tartiktani. In that case, in fact, we can go back and look at the Mishnah again, and we'll see that the Mishnah, in fact, taught us both of these things. Because it said, if we look at the Mishnah, it said, Dinei mamonot bishlosha, gzelot v'chavalot bishlosha. Right? It said that the cases about money are with 3 judges, and thefts and personal damages are with 3 judges. At the time, we sort of ignored that as a stylistic thing, but now the Gemara says, no, let's see those as 2 distinct lines of the Mishnah with 2 different meanings. And dinei mamonot bishlosha hedyotot, the laws about money are judged with 3 regular people. Hedyot is linguistically related to the English word idiot, although it's not an insult. In Aramaic, it just means a regular person. That's why I translated layman, because what it means depends on what you're comparing it to, in the same way as layman. If I'm talking to doctors, then in that context, a layperson is someone who didn't go to medical school, whereas if I'm talking to rabbis, a layperson is somebody who didn't go to rabbinical school. So the word hedyot functions roughly the same way. It means somebody who doesn't have whatever special characteristic it is the person I'm comparing them to has. Okay, and then the next line of the Mishnah that said, gzelot v'chavalot bishlosha, theft and personal damages are with 3, that I'm now going to read as theft and personal damages are with 3 experts. So now the Mishnah has actually said what it means. And I don't need this whole convoluted way of reading the Mishnah that Rav Huna suggested. Rav Huna? I think it was Rabbi Abahu suggested in last week's shir about the cases about money and what are cases about money. Cases about money are this, but they're not that. We don't need to interpolate all those words. We can just actually read the words of the Mishnah and understand that when it says 3 the first time, it means 3 laymen, and when it says 3 the second time, it means 3 expert judges, and the Mishnah actually says exactly what it means. Okay, and the Gemara supports itself. It says ve'od shlosha lamali, and also, why, other than this, why else would I need to say the word 3 twice? Okay, that seems actually like on a stylistic level in the Mishnah, that seems now like a much better reading than the one we had last week. Okay, Elam Rava, rather, in fact, Rava says, Tartiktani mishum Rabbi Chanina. In fact, the Mishnah is teaching the 2 cases separately. One is layperson judges, the other is expert judges, and the whole thing is like Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina is the one who said that the Torah really wants us to have only one legal system, but we've split the legal system between loans and everything else in order to make it easier for people to borrow money. Okay, now we have an alternative way to derive our system, right? What we have had so far was, in fact, you're supposed to have 3 expert judges, but we've lowered the standard for loans. Rav Acha Breder Rav Ika is going to suggest something else. Rav Acha Breder Rav Ika Amar Mideoraita Chad Nami Kasher. Rav Acha Breder Rav Ika says, actually, nope, I reject that whole business. as far as the Torah is concerned, for collecting loans, in fact, one judge would have been plenty. Because it says in the beginning of Parshat Kedoshim, Vayikra 19:15, you, singular, second person, you will judge your people, your fellow, in righteousness. So that sounds like there are cases in which the Torah could be talking to a single judge who has the capacity to do the right thing or not do the right thing all by themselves. Where on a panel of three, presumably no one person can ever do the wrong thing by themselves, because you need a majority. But if you're by yourself, then of course you need to be told to do the right thing alone. So Rav Acha Breder of Ika says that this is talking about a case of loans. A case of loans, we only had, well, as far as the Torah was concerned, we only needed one judge. But we've changed that. We've upped it to 3 instead of 1. Mishum Yoshvei Kranot. But we had a problem, which is the Yoshvei Kranot. Yoshvei Kranot are people who sit on street corners. Rashi says these are street vendors. Other people seem to think that they're just lazy people who have nothing better to do with their time than sit on the street corner doing nothing all day. Rashi seems more plausible to me, because wouldn't you starve to death if you just sat on a street corner all day? But in any case, whoever they are, they're not learned people, but they are people who are available to be your friendly local thug who helps you collect your loan. And we don't really want the lender to be able to go out in the street, grab any unlearned person that he wants off of a street corner and say, make that guy pay me my loan, and to have that be part of the legal system, right? That'd be bad. So because of that, we've required 3 judges instead of 1. But the Gemara is confused by that, and it says, Atu bitzlata milo have yoshvei kranot. It says, wait a minute, if we require 3, then there won't be people sitting on street corners anymore? How does that solve your problem? Because you could grab 3 unlearned thugs from the local street corner, and there's still going to be unlearned thugs, right? It doesn't, having 2 more of them doesn't necessarily fix it. The Gemara says, "Efshar delate behuchad degamir." Now, this is I think, a deliberate overstatement. What it says is it's not possible that there won't be at least one of them who has learned. And the person I was listening to teaching Daf Yomi a couple of years ago when we did Sanhedrin translated that as, if you go up to guys on the street corners and choose 3 of them, at least one of them will be a learned person, a rabbi. I don't think it can seriously mean that, because it really doesn't matter how many people gather on street corners. I don't think you can be assured that there are no more than 2 ignoramuses on any individual street corner. I think it's intended much more weakly, as there's probably at least one of them has been involved in this kind of court case before and has some sense of what's supposed to happen, or maybe even one of them will have a sense of fairness. But I don't think that we're asserting that if you choose 3 people off of the sidewalk in a random location, at least one of them will have significant legal knowledge. That seems over the top to me. Okay, in any case, so we upped the number of people on the panel, not because the Torah told us we needed 3 or because we have any particular expectations of these people, but because we're worried that if you have only one inexpert person, that you're going to get more or less random and not necessarily fair results. And we feel like 3 at least gives you a fighting chance at a legal result. In that case, elamata tau lo yisham. So now we have the same response that we had the last time that we said we changed the law so that this panel of 3 non-experts could judge, which is, if we've authorized these people to judge, then if they make a mistake, they shouldn't have to pay for it, because they're just acting on the instructions of of the legal system. They shouldn't be held more responsible than any other judge. But the Gemara responds to that. In that case, kol shekain denefishe yoshvei kranot. In that case, there'll be even more people sitting on street corners who are unlearned. Right? If we make people pay for their mistakes, then there's a chance that that one guy who happens to have judged a case before will have, informed himself as to how to do this in order to avoid having to pay for his mistakes. And it dramatically, I think, increases your chance that at least one of the people that you volunteers that you pull off the street corner will have learned something about how to protect themselves from having to pay you. So in fact, we do make them pay for their mistakes. Okay, so now we had two theories about how the Mishnah got to its idea that you have a panel of 3 lay people for loans and a panel of 3 experts for all other cases that involve finances. One of them, Rava's theory, is that we started out with needing a panel of 3 experts and all normal court procedure in order to collect the loan, and we lowered the standards in order to encourage lenders to lend money. And the other is Rav Acha Breda Rav Ika, who thinks that we started out with basically no standard. You just need one untrained person. And we raised the standards to 3 still untrained people, but 3 people who are going to be held financially responsible if they get the answer wrong, in an attempt to make the system more fair, more legal. So what difference does it make? As long as they both come in the end to the middle, to the same plan for how we're going to adjudicate this case, who cares? Okay, so that's what Ma'ika bein Rava Rav Acha Breda Rav Ika. What's the difference between these guys? Ika beinaihu, the case that's different between them is de Amar Shmuel, Shnayim shedanu dinehem din, aval nikreu beit din chatzuf. So Shmuel said that if 2 judges judge a case, their judgment is a judgment. It's legal, it's binding, it's real. But they're called a beit din, a court that has chutzpah. The word chutzpah is, at least 1,500 years old here. It's not an appropriate thing to do. It was arrogant and inappropriate, and they shouldn't have done it. But once they did it, it worked, according to Shmuel. L'Rava, according to Rava, late to Shmuel. Rava is going to disagree with Shmuel because in Rava's universe, the Torah required a panel of 3 expert judges. We lowered the standard down to 3 layperson judges, but we never changed the number. And we never allowed any kind of court that didn't have at least 3 judges on it. On the other hand, Rav Acha Breda Rav Ika, Itle de Shmuel. But Rav Acha Breda Rav Ika will agree with Shmuel because in his system, we started out only requiring 1 judge. We upped it to 3. But the truth is that original law in which you only needed 1 judge is still hovering there in the background. And it's true that people require 3 judges, but God only requires 1. So once 2 people have gone and judged, we'll say, well, all right, at least it's good enough for God, so I guess we'll take it, even though you shouldn't have done that because the rabbi said not to. Okay, so for Rav Acha Breda Rav Ika, a two-judge court is inappropriate and you shouldn't do it, but it does work. Okay, on to the next thing in the Mishnah. The next line in the Mishnah was nezek v'chatzi nezek. Nezek is when you pay the actual amount that you destroyed of something. If I break your vase, then the vase has a known value. It would have been possible to sell it. We know what it would have sold for, and I give you the amount of money the vase was worth. That's nezek. right? I have made you whole again by giving you exactly what you lost, not the same object, but the same value. Chetzi nezek theoretically should be half of that, except that Chetzi nezek is in a very particular case, which is the case where you have an animal. The Torah says a shor, an ox, but as we saw in the Mishnah, this is true of almost any animal that doesn't have a prior history of attacking. But in this particular case, on the spur of the moment, it attacked somebody's animal and it killed it. So the owner of the attacking animal pays half of the value of the dead animal. That's chetzi nezek, because you pay half of the value. And we will see that as we go into this, that there's a disagreement whether what that means is really you owed the whole thing because your animal is an extension of you and your animal killed somebody else's animal. So that's not that different than you killing somebody else's animal. But the Torah took pity on you because after all, in order to live a normal life in an agrarian society, you have to have animals and you can't be everywhere all the time. So since you didn't have any way of knowing this was going to happen, the Torah lets you off the hook easy and only charges you half. Okay, that's one option. Option two is, in fact, you had no way of knowing that this animal was going to be violent. You had no responsibility to keep it home and not let it go out and interact with other animals. It's not your fault that it killed the other animal, but now that it has killed another animal, it becomes your responsibility to take it home and lock it up and either keep it locked up or eat it for dinner, but whatever, make sure it doesn't go out and destroy other people's animals anymore. And in order to send that message home, we are going to fine you half of the value of the animal that it killed to make sure that you take the situation seriously. Okay, the same amount of money, same judgment, same case, but two different ways of conceptualizing it. And we're going to call the first thing that I just said mamon or mamona, which we're going to translate into English compensatory damages. I had a long conversation with my sister last night, who's a litigator, and she wasn't sure whether compensatory damages or economic damages is better. She didn't think it mattered that much, but we decided to go with compensatory damages. For any attorneys who are here this evening, I'd be happy to hear your opinion on that. And the second one we're going to call a fine. We possibly could have called it punitive damages, but that seemed excessively complicated. In Hebrew, it's a knas, kuf nun samach. Okay, so the Gemara doesn't start from that issue, though, although we will come back around to that. It starts with a different problem, which is nezek hainu chavalot. Like, wait a minute. You told me in the last line of the Mishnah that if I had a case of personal damages, then that case gets judged by a panel of 3 experts. Nezek is a subcategory of chavalot. If you damage somebody else's body, then one of the 5 payments that the 8th chapter of Bava Kama says you have to pay to them is nezek, is the actual lost value of their body. So shouldn't nezek just be included in chavalot, and don't we like not need to mention it again? And yes, nezek is a much bigger category and it applies to damaging things other than people's bodies, and that would have been a reasonable answer, but it's not the one they're going to give. So the answer is mishum, or the first answer is mishum de kabai limitne chetzi nezek, tani nami nezek shalim. So since we're going to need to talk about chetzi nezek, about the half damages, so we also mention whole damages because it sounds more, the sentence sounds more symmetrical that way, or it's easier to remember or something like that. Okay, so the Gemara says, but that doesn't help. Chetzi nezek nami hainu chavalot, because the half damages is also a subset of personal damages. So that doesn't get me anywhere. Why couldn't I just know this whole thing from the fact that it said chavalot earlier in the Mishnah? Well, the Gemara says, Tana mamona v'ktani knasa, because the Mishnah is dividing things up into categories. And first, it's listing the mamon category, the compensatory damages category, and then it's going to list the knas category, the fine category. So chavalot are always compensatory. That's the definition of them, is you pay for the damage that you did to the person's body, which in our world without a slave market would be very difficult to claim has an objective value that you can objectively calculate. But in the world of the Gemara, where there's active slave trading happening, it's actually not that hard to find out how much a person's body was worth yesterday before you cut them and is worth today after you cut them, which is horrible, by the way, and we should not bring back slavery. I'm just explaining why it's so obvious to the Gemara that a payment for damage to a human body could just be compensation, just like any other compensation for actual real value that's lost. As opposed to Viktani Knasa, and then it taught about the fines. So then it talks about the Chetzi Nezek, the half damage. So the Gemara says, well, okay, but that only works half the time. That only works according to the position that half damage is a fine. All right, the one I described is that in the case of the half damage, you don't actually, on a moral level, owe anything, but the Torah is fining you in order to make you take the situation seriously. So that's not a compensation for anything. That's just the Torah is making you pay money as a punishment. That's a fine. So if you say that, then it's a different category, and it makes sense for the Mishnah to divide things into different categories. And now it has to say Chetzi Nezek separately because it hasn't talked about any fines yet. But for the other side of that dispute that says that half damage is mammon, is compensatory damages, so what's that person going to say about why this Mishnah has to talk about Chetzi Nezek when it's already talked about Chavalot? Ella, rather, so we're not, the first suggestion works for some people, but it doesn't work for everybody. So we're going to try again and see if we can come up with an explanation that would work according to everybody. Ella, I did a kabai limitna tashlume kefel, the tashlume arba'a v'chamisha, the mamon she'eno mishtalem beroshu, tananami chetzi nezek the mamon she'eno mishtalem beroshu. So, but since it has to teach, we haven't gotten there yet, but we read it in the Mishnah, we haven't gotten there in the Gemara yet, but it had to teach about double payments that the thief pays and quadruple and quintuple payments, which are also a thief, but that's a thief who steals an animal and then kills it. He pays quadruple for a sheep and quintuple for a cow. So those are mammon, which is an extraordinary claim, but we'll come back to that in a second. Sorry, they're mammon she'eno mishtalim barosh. They're mammon, they're compensatory damages, but of a different amount than the original value. It's not mishtalim barosh, it's not paid on the head. That's a reference to a pasuk that says that you should pay something on the head of the animal you're paying for. We're just going to translate it as what it means idiomatically, which is the original value. So since it's going to teach about double, quadruple, and quintuple payments, which are a different amount, those are all bigger amounts. It also teaches about Chetzi Nezek, about the half damages, which is also a different amount, although this one is a smaller amount. All right, so the Mishnah starts out talking about all of the times when you pay back exactly the same thing as the original amount that the case was originally about. You borrowed money, you damaged something, you stole something, you stole something in a way that doesn't require you to pay double. And then having done that, then it goes on and lists all of the ways that you might also have to pay a different amount than the original amount. Just to address what I just said, when we talk about stealing, there are two different verbs the Torah uses for stealing. There's Gilal Nun Bet, Ganav, which we interpret to be burglary, right? That's sneaking into somebody's home in the middle of the night and taking their stuff. That's the kind of theft for which you need to pay double if we catch you. And then there's Gezel, Gimel Zayin Lamed. And Gezel is pickpocketing or holding somebody up at knife point on the street, that sort of thing. And the fine is different. You pay 1 1/4 of what you took. And I think you only even pay the extra quarter if you also swore falsely about it. If you don't swear falsely about it, I think you actually just don't pay a penalty at all. The standard explanation given for that is that the pickpocket or the mugger who steals in broad daylight is not afraid of God, and they're also not afraid of people. They just not afraid of anybody. They don't follow rules. They don't care what anybody thinks. As opposed to the burglar who's not afraid of God. They're prepared to do the wrong thing, but they are afraid of being caught by humans. And that's theologically more damaging than the mugger. Maybe. Sometimes we say things like that, and sometimes we seem to say the opposite. So I'm not convinced that we're consistently hold that position. But just to get to the last line of the Gemara here, because we're already over time, the idea to kabai limitna chatzi nezek tananami nezek, and since, and this is going to be necessary for either of the two suggestions that we made, once you explain why, you need to teach half damage, then the only way we're going to be able to explain teaching nezek, teaching the full damage, is that it's there to make the sentence symmetrical with the half damage. And we just like saying those words together. We don't have a better explanation than that for nezek. The only question is what explanation. We have two possible explanations for why the half damage is there. But either way, the next step after that is going to be, well, and as long as we were talking about half damage, we threw in the damage too, just to make it sound better. Okay. That was very long and complicated, and I would be happy to take questions.
Does this procedure about the loans, is that, and needing, and lay judges being sufficient, is that have anything to do with the ceremony that people do in Jubilee years when they, Shemitah, where they, when they, you have to go through a ceremony with 3 people to extend your loan past the year of release?
I don't think so. They're certainly not connected with the same people in terms of who made the decree. And I think you may even need expert judges for a prose bowl, although I'm not sure. It's not my expertise, and I need to execute one myself. So maybe I'll find out and I'll let you know. But the way a prose bowl works, as I understand it, is that while individuals are not allowed to collect debts to them during, after, once Shemitah has happened, debts are canceled if they were owed to individuals. Debts owed to the government are not canceled by Shemitah. And so what a prose bowl does is it just assigns your debt to the government for collection. So it used to be that Deborah Klapper owed Harvey Weiner $100. Now you write a document and execute it in front of a Beit Din that makes Deborah Klapper owe the Beit Din $100, and the Beit Din owes Harvey Weiner $100. And since the Beit Din is part of both of those transactions, neither one will be canceled. And so in effect, I still owe you $100. But we've introduced a middle person, an institutional middle person, that because it's not a person doesn't get its debts canceled.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. And yes, it is Shemitah this fall, so we should all be concerned if we owe people money to get it paid back, and if we are owed money to consider executing a prose bowl if we're still planning to collect it. All right. Next Monday, I believe I am canceling class because I think I'm driving my son to New York with his stuff to move him into his apartment. If that changes, I'll let you know. But as of right now, let's assume no class next week, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Deborah.